For years, I've been talking to people about having permission to take a leap of faith. We all know that life doesn't happen in a straight line, so how do you overcome your past and possibly current circumstances to live the life you were created for? Stick around to hear our guest answers that will lend you some courage to give yourself permission to leap, no matter how twisted the path may be.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nisha Zachary, and this is the Zigzag Leap. Today, I am talking to the amazing Tina Fumo, who is in Canada, and she has an amazing story of fighting for what's right, following your intuition, taking leaps of faith. How are you today, Tina?
I'm good, Nisha. How are you doing?
I'm good. So can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
A little bit about myself. I'm a second generation Italian Canadian. I was born in Canada, but both my parents are from Italy. And I grew up in the Canadian school system. Italian was my first language, but I wrote the book obviously in English. And yeah, just like everyone else, I went to a good Catholic school, and well, not everyone else, but went to school here in Canada and got a good education and got married, had a kid, got divorced, still had the kid. And she is the focus of the book because she went on to have a baby girl. And my granddaughter was born in 2017, and she was born in a different province from where I live. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And my granddaughter was born in the province of BC. I don't mention the town because it's not really important to the storyline.
Got it.
But yeah, so here I am, a grandma who wrote a book.
Okay, and the book that you're referring to is called Fancy Prison, which I'm really curious to know. How did you come up with that name?
That's a great question, Nisha. Fancy Prison. I have to back up a little bit. So the book is about our ordeal with the Child Protective Services, and it was extremely confusing and very frustrating. Part of the process of dealing with them is that I had to sign court orders. One court order was a supervision order over my daughter that I would watch her and not leave her alone with her newborn baby. And the second order was a TCO, which is a temporary custody order, which meant I had temporary custody of my granddaughter, which I accepted because we had to just deal with the system and get the baby back into our family, back to our custody. So part of it was we had to find another place to live because my husband and we live in an adult-only building, and we wouldn't have been allowed to have kept the baby here for 3 months, which was the term of these court orders. So we had to find another place, and it was beautiful. It was a gorgeous place. It was extremely expensive. It was money I didn't have. And we didn't have a stick of furniture, but my daughter started calling it Fancy Prison, right? Because we were serving out these court orders, but she was still, and it was extremely humiliating for her, and it was embarrassing, and she was, she was traumatized and being treated like a child because she couldn't even be alone with her own baby. But she would just be really tongue-in-cheek about, okay, here we go, back to Fancy Prison kind of thing. So yeah, the name stuck. Yeah.
Got it. So how did your daughter end up being involved with CPS and all of this coming about for your granddaughter?
Yeah, we speculate at most about what the initial call was. We think someone that she was living with called because they thought she was a meth head or something like that. And maybe it was by association. I mean, it was a small town. Everybody knows everybody. So sure, she knew people who used the drug. I mean, that's more of a indication of the social issues so much as, my daughter actually using it. But she didn't. Like, she's not a meth head. And we had proof that she'd never touched the stuff, and she was telling the social workers, look, I never touched the stuff, never will. And we had evidence in her urine tests from her pregnancy, and in the umbilical cord tests, they took samples from the baby's umbilical cord after she was born, and everything was clean. Like it. So why are we still in court? Like, so even though the original complaint was that my daughter was a meth head, it didn't seem to matter whether it was true or not. It just gave them a reason to open the file and start investigating and do what they did.
Wow. So take me to this point in your book. It says that your friend Suzanne called you and she says, "Get here now. In my experience, it's a lot more difficult to get children back after they've been put in foster care." And my first thought is like, what?
Yeah.
So like, how does that even work? How do you respond to that?
Well, I responded by doing what Suzanne said and trusting her. And I dropped my life and drove to the town to find out what the heck was going on. But my reaction was much the same as yours. Like, what is going on?
Right.
And the level of confusion I felt when my grandbaby was just a week old, or I think Suzanne called when she was about 10 days old, and then I made the trip 2 days later. The level of confusion that I felt here in a different province was never really alleviated. It still is not alleviated. I still don't really know 100% what was motivating them to do what they did, but they went ahead and did it anyway. And yeah, I mean, I really do try to touch on, it was just an incredibly stressful, very overwhelming situation.
Right.
And I do try to make a start at understanding and touching on some of the points in my book. Things that I'm just not the same person I was, before I made that trip. So that person that Suzanne phoned to call to say, get here now, that she doesn't exist anymore. This is now the Tina that was created from that ordeal. Yeah.
What is different? What did you feel shift between the person before that phone call came in and the person that you are now?
Well, I certainly don't have very much trust for the government anymore, for them to come in and have the power that they have and not be very clear about what their agenda is at all, and not believing what they're saying and not trusting them to follow their own policies, and not even trusting them to have any common sense, which that was extremely frustrating. Is that what they were doing? It's just nothing was adding up. It just wasn't making any sense at all.
Wow. So your daughter is going through this, and from what you explained to me, it's not like you were right around the corner. You had to drive.
Yeah, I had to drive like 10. Well, I think the book opens up with me driving through a blizzard. And people in this area, if they remember that day, they may or may not remember that was probably one of the worst blizzards we had that winter. And when I drove past Banff, I texted back my husband because he'd been quite worried about me, and another friend had texted me too, because I left really early in the morning at 5 and they were all still asleep. And while I was driving, I was getting these texts, but I wasn't looking at my phone. I was looking at the road to make sure I didn't head into a ditch, because the snowflakes were just whipping across the headbeams. And yeah, it was a pretty bad blizzard. And I think at one point I just had to pull over and close my eyes, because I was just like, I was getting dizzy and almost snow blinded because of just trying to grip the steering wheel and stay on the road. But, eventually I made it through. Like I wanted to see my grandbaby. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the first mother who will, come hell or high water. I wanted to, by the end of that day, I wanted to be holding my newborn grandbabies. So that's definitely what kept me going.
So once you get there, what's next? Like, if you don't know who to trust, what's going on? Like, what do you do? Obviously,
well, I didn't
get picked in somewhere.
Yeah, no, when I arrived in town, I thought that the social workers were on my side. And by the end of the week, that changed. When they took the baby, that changed, like in a very traumatic heartbeat. And so when I got there, I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll just meet with the social workers. We'll figure out what's going on here,
Mm-hmm.
and everything will be fine. Like my daughter, she's a new mom, and for me, housing was the main thing, because she was in this crowded house with a family who lived upstairs who had 4 kids. There was another roommate who lived down the hall from her. And I had visited that house in the past, and I just thought it was disgusting. And so I'm like, I'm just going to help her get better housing. And we already had sort of a plan B that
Mm-hmm.
I was going to help her with. But once the social workers got involved, they just pretty much wanted to dismiss me, like anything that I would want to do or have a say in my granddaughter's life, which again goes back to the level of confusion and how ridiculous, and how there just wasn't any common sense about this. It's like, do you people honestly think that you have more right to decide the future of my granddaughter than me? I'm right here. I have no criminal record. I don't use drugs, no alcohol, nothing. There is absolutely no reason why you should not be considering me number one person to
Right.
be helping in this process. But I saw no evidence of that at all. They just wanted to dismiss me. They wanted to dig up some dirt on me. And I just saw no evidence of them wanting to actually work with the family.
So when people think of child protective services, you think of getting the children out of difficult situations and placing them, with foster care or something like that. But as you said, you were right there. So it would just stand to reason that you would be like the first choice. So when you say that they were looking for dirt on you, they've already got dirt on your daughter, so to speak, from wherever they got this information from. So were they taking that assumption about your daughter and placing it on you, or like, what does that look like?
I think so. I think they were just assuming that my daughter, whatever issues she had, that she had inherited from me. And again, I'm speculating, but I think that what they found out was that we're actually 2 very different people. Like my daughter, when she gets nervous, well, even now, but she's a very chatty person, but that becomes even worse when she was nervous and stressed and basically cornered. I, like the first thing that she said when her baby was born was, "Please don't take my baby." I mean, how heartbreaking is that?
Wow.
That's how stressed she was. And so before I got there, what my daughter did was she would just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk until she incriminated herself. And because with child protection, you're actually not charged under the criminal code. So nobody reads you your rights. Nobody reads you the rights so in your head, read yourself the rights. You have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to an attorney. So those are the first 2 things you have to say to yourself. So when I got there, the social workers realized, oh, wait a second, Grammy isn't like the daughter. She doesn't talk and talk and talk and talk until she incriminates herself. I was just very quiet. I was very confused.
Right.
And I was just trying to reconcile this whole, okay, you're working with the family, but you're doing all this stuff that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, they just realized I was a very different personality, and they could not kind of blame me for the situation my daughter was in, because she was making her own mistakes, and she wasn't, she didn't inherit drug addiction or anything from me. Like she was,
Right.
yeah, she was doing that all on her own. Okay.
So now you're there, and as you said, you're in this fancy prison. You're able to like make accommodations, but what does that look like? You've dropped your entire life to accommodate these people who are not making this easy.
No, it was very, very, very expensive. And I mean, after you get, again, a better detail and sense of the timeline in the book, because it wasn't quite like I got there and then got to bring my family home. No, they took the baby. We had to be there for 27 days and show up for visits and coordinate with the foster parents, who ended up being very, very nice people. But at the time, I didn't know that.
Right.
And then we had to work with the social workers, and I had to sign these 2 court orders, the TCO and the supervision order, and then basically move my family back to Alberta into the fancy prison where we lived for about 6 months, because they were just, after that 3-month TCO was up, they just wanted to keep dragging it out and dragging it out. And then in the book, I mentioned that. So at first, my husband, he wasn't there when all this happened. And then eventually he just fell hopelessly in love with the child. He just, I got to see how we bond, how men bond. They have to wait till the baby's born and then, hold the baby. And so I got to see him and fall in love with him in all different ways, because you see how gentle he is with the baby. But
That's awesome.
when we first came back, we were so traumatized and so stressed out, and it took time for my husband for us to calm down, to breathe a little bit, and then for him to realize that, yeah, actually, you're right. They don't know what they're doing and they don't know what they're talking about. So he's the one who kind of pushed us to make that final trip back to court. And then we were all united as a family. And it was a lot better for us to just go and go back to that final court date. And then we finally got a judge who had half a brain, and he put an end to it. So yeah, it was, we had a happy ending to our story, but a lot of people don't. Like, they just don't have the lucky breaks that we had. They don't have the resources, and they don't get their kids back. It's very sad. It's extremely unfair, and it's so confusing, because I grew up in a time when I thought social workers were supposed to help families,
Right.
at least in that situation. I think there's lots of great social workers. Like, I don't want to come off on the show as I'm trashing social workers, because that's not the case. I mean, there's a lot of different social workers and who do different kinds of work.
Right.
But I just didn't see it with the 4 social workers who were involved in our case. I just didn't see it at all. And I came from an age where they actually helped. Like, one of my guidance counselors in school, she's one of the ladies I dedicated the book to. She has a background in social work. The foster mom who took care of our baby for 27 days, she comes from a background of social work. And so she was telling us what she used to do, with some of the families, which made sense. She was a very nice lady, and she ended up sharing a fair bit of information.
That's good.
About what she had done. And I think in the end, the foster parents, they just felt like, yeah, she needs to go back to you. Like, we don't, and the dad even admitted, yeah, we don't really understand why she was taken in the first place. So, so these are the opinions of people who are getting to know us, and doing, you think that the social workers are supposed to do, but they didn't. And they just treated us like we were guilty criminals.
So what is it that the last judge saw? Sorry, that nobody else was seeing? Like, do you know what that?
Well, I say it in my book, and I can only speculate, and because I can't read people's minds. But up until then, judges weren't really, they were just kind of believing whatever the social workers put in front of them. And then that last court date, and I explain this in my book, we had gotten advice from a lawyer during the summer, and she, again, did not have a very good opinion of social workers who worked in child protection and took babies away. She worked with a lot of Indigenous families, so she saw a lot of this sort of systematic routines and racism. But she had said to me, and I mentioned this in my book, Tina, when they call your name, don't ask, just take the baby into the courtroom. Just sit in the very front of the courtroom with the baby so the judge sees the child. And when she was giving me this advice, I could not for the life of me understand the context that I would need that advice in until the day came and our name was called in court. And then I'm remembering what she said, and that's exactly what we did. We just all walked into court. We didn't ask anyone. We just did it. We brought the baby in, and my husband was sitting with her while my daughter and we had to stand up at the bar, and then my husband just stayed in the courtroom with the baby for that judge to see. So I don't know if that made a difference. I think it did, for that judge to see that here's a mom with, okay, with these pieces of paper that the social workers are putting in front of the judge. He's seeing with his own eyes maybe a different picture.
Gotcha.
And he started to ask questions. And I think that's all that needs to happen, is start asking questions. Start, trying to understand different angles. I mean, don't just assume because somebody puts something on a piece of paper and puts it in front of a judge. Don't assume it's true because there's no evidence.
Right. So in all of this, how was your faith tested? Like what was it?
Well, I thank God every day. Like I do. I don't know what it was, but we had the right people come into our life at the right time and give us the right advice right when we needed it. Call it coincidence, divine intervention, whatever. I just felt, God was on our side. And I know I've prayed a lot. I prayed a lot as a mother, you grow up.
Yeah.
You grow up raising your kids and you just, oh my God, I hope I'm doing this right,
Right.
And in the book, I do share a very spiritual moment that I have with my granddaughter, and it was really powerful. And again, it just came right when I needed it. She was being taken away from us, and it's hard to explain the confusion and the stress, because your whole world, I mean, literally, the name of your podcast here is what, Zigzag or
Zigzag Leap? Yes.
Yeah, like literally, you hear that expression, your life gets turned upside down. That's what happened. I didn't know what was up. And while they were taking her, they had the audacity to ask me what I did for a living. And I remember looking at them like, what? But I didn't know then. What I know now is that they were trying to ascertain how long I could stay there. Like if I was living paycheck to paycheck, or what my job was. And I mean, if those social workers now read that book and read that moment that I have with my granddaughter, of course, they wouldn't have known about it because that was a spiritual moment that happened with my grandchild. And I can explain it. When it happened, I almost didn't understand what was going on, but she was just infused me with strength. And she was the only one with real power because she had just been delivered to us from God 14 days earlier.
That's awesome. That's absolutely awesome. I was just telling a friend of mine in conversation before this, we were talking about our spring babies, and my daughter is my one spring baby, the only person in the house that was born early in the year. And as she was being born, I remember hearing God say, "You're stronger than you think you are." And it's just like, I understand that moment that you're talking about where it's just like something happens where they transfer that energy and that power over to you just when you need it.
Just when you need it. Yeah. Did you have a hard labor, or why did you?
No, actually, we got to the hospital and she was here 20 minutes later, but I kept telling the doctor, I was like, no, I can't do this. Like, I need an epidural. We have a C-section scheduled, like all of these things. And it was like, no, you're going. This is it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's the thing that people don't realize, though, is that if you pay attention to the signs, if you see what's going on around you, and you're sensitive to the energy of what God has in the room, he will like make his presence known without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in our case too, in the book, when I have that moment, I'll just mention this, but there was nothing blocking that moment from happening. Like I was just experiencing real human emotions and real confusion and real pain. I wasn't numbing myself with drugs or alcohol. I went to those meetings 100% sober and a human being. And so there was nothing blocking that spiritual moment. Because I do think if, people are high all the time or drunk or whatever, it kind of blocks those moments.
Yeah.
But in the book, I do mention how when my daughter was growing up, a teenager, and she, would go through volatile times as a teenager. And I'd always say, God only gives you what you can handle. And it was my way of just trying to empower her. Like there's a greater good out there. There's a higher being.
Right.
And she didn't understand me then, but she understands me now, why I was trying to say that to her. It was just infusing that strength in her, that she has all the tools that she needs. By the way, the baby on the cover is a story of Delana Sullivan, and I go into that story in the book, which is it is just the most heartbreaking story. I'm not going to repeat it now because I'll end up crying, but at the end of the book, Jamie, Delana's mother, when she read what I had said about, telling my daughter, God only gives you what you can handle, she admitted, Tina, I always hated that expression. And I kind of understand why, because of what she went through. She had to bury her 4-month-old baby. And it's like she said, yeah, I could not handle losing my baby. So I really hated that. I really hate that expression, Tina. I'm like, you know what? You're entitled to feel. I get it. I think
Yeah.
if I had been through what you had been through, I would definitely question God. I think in our case, we had a happy ending, but I do think that there was a higher power working in our favor. Again, I don't know what it was. I think it was maybe her. I call her Bianca, but that's not her real name. I think it was just little Bianca. It's like, yep, I'm calling the shots, Grammy. I'm coming back to you and Mom, and I'm going to be exactly where I belong, where I'm supposed to be in life, and that is right here with us. So we could not be happier.
I love it. So one question I like to ask
Sure.
is, what is your definition of permission?
Permission. I think when I think of permission as something a child, it brings me back to a childhood state where you're asking permission of your parents to maybe go down to the park or whatever, or go over to a friend's, just so your parents know where you are. But that's my definition of permission, is asking to go past a boundary. And so I think when we have to give ourselves permission sometimes to grow, because when you do kind of come out of your routine, or you're out of your comfort zone a little bit, that's when you learn, and that's when you grow. And to give I guess maybe to give myself permission that to have been there for my daughter, like, no, I have a right. I understand what you guys are saying. You want to control the narrative here, but I have a right. I have permission to be here. This is so even though I was out of my comfort zone, and it's a testament to me as a parent and as a grandparent. I never knew what this child protection system had become, because I was never involved in it. Like, so that's kind of a good thing, don't you think?
Exactly.
It was never, I don't really know anyone who ever had their child taken away. And I do now, but back then, like up until then, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm in it now, even though I've never really heard about or had any dealings with this. I guess I better figure it out fast. And we had Suzanne too. I mean, I go into her story and why she ended up being such a powerful and important advocate for us, because of what she had gone through with MCFD. And she didn't have a happy ending to her story. She doesn't know where her boys are.
Oh no.
Yeah, you haven't. I don't think you've gotten to that yet, have you?
No, not yet.
There's 2 or 3 stories intertwined. I mean, I've mentioned Delana now. She's the baby on the cover. I mentioned Suzanne, but Suzanne's story is very much intertwined in ours, because we've been friends a long, long time. And now we have a very special relationship with Suzanne. And then there's another mother I mentioned in there who we helped her get her babies back. And I mentioned, I don't go into too much detail about this because I'm not Indigenous, but I do talk about residential schooling. And the timing of it was interesting, because I wrote this book during the winter, and they started to find unmarked graves in May. So I'd already written this book by then. And so one of the things that I found, though, writing that chapter, because I must have rewritten that chapter 3 or 4 times. It's called The Time Traveling Eagle. I actually had a hard time finding people who would talk about residential schools, because a lot of them, if they were maybe my age, maybe their parents went to residential schools. So I would ask them, and they said, my parents never talked about it. So that was by far the thing that I got the most from it when I was trying to find out a little bit more about residential schools. So either they don't want to talk to me because I'm a white person, I don't know, but by far that's what I got. They never talked about it, or they weren't willing to share it. Yeah.
That's wild. But I like what you said about being able to basically stretching boundaries.
Yeah.
And even in having that conversation, you asking the questions about the residential schools, you helping these other people that are in the same situation. And then you even telling your story, you staying there with your daughter and not giving into all of the pressure that they were putting on you and your family. Like that's like the very definition of permission. When you give it to yourself, it's like, I'm not asking you for you to
Yeah.
tell me that this is okay. This
Yeah.
is my baby cub here that I'm taking care
Yeah.
of.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And just actually just not very long ago, just a few weeks ago, because Marilyn's the grandmother of the baby on the cover of my book, Delana.
Okay.
And just a few weeks ago, she had admitted to me that, Tina, I will never let anyone ever intimidate me ever again. And I'm like, Marilyn, I hear you, but look what it cost her to be
Right.
able to say that. It cost her grandchild, and now all they have is a grave to go to visit their little baby. She'll never, she would be 10 years old today. She'll never grow up. She'll never, have the first boyfriend or have their another. Anyway, it's
Right.
I at the very end of my book, I do talk about going with Jamie to visit her daughter's grave. That day has come and gone, and that was, it was hard to know how to feel that morning. I was going to it happened just a couple months ago now, I think. The day after September 11th. This year was the 20th anniversary of September 11th. Yeah. So the day after that, it was a Sunday, and it was pouring rain here. And we had my granddaughter overnight, and she saw me out in the garden picking flowers. And she knew something was up because, normally I wouldn't do that. And then she saw me getting my coat on and everything. And normally we would go to church that morning, but then she saw that like I wasn't doing the usual routine. And I just said to her, well, no, Grandma's going to go see a grave today. And I'm sorry, you can't come with me, baby. And so she throws a fit and blah, 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 and then she just stayed with my husband. But that day, again, it was like the whole driving through the blizzard again day, because I was going to see visit Jamie and Marilyn, and then go visit Delana's grave. And the Trans-Canada Highway was just a sheet of water. Like I was gripping the steering wheel because I thought I was going to hydroplane off the highway. And then I get there, and with my basket of flowers, and we go, and then I got into their car, and they took me to the graveyard. And they live in a small town outside of Edmonton. So it took me about an hour to drive there. And then the cemetery where Delana is buried is even further than that. And we pulled up along this rural road, and there was just a sort of a boundary of trees with wooden fence posts and an wrought iron gate. I didn't even know we were at a cemetery, and I kind of froze. I didn't want to get out of the car, and then Jamie and Marilyn got out. They knew the routine where to go to Delana's grave, and I didn't want to get out of the car because I'm like, are we here? Like, this doesn't look like a graveyard. And then I waited, and then Jamie came back. Oh yeah, the flowers. And then finally I got out, and I carried the flowers over. And yeah, it was just so sad being there. Like, it just didn't make any sense why we would be visiting the grave of who was once a healthy little 4-month-old baby. And it took me a couple of days to process that visit. It really did. But again, going back to how Canadians are feeling this year, because there's just so much outrage over the unmarked graves being found at former residential schools.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't do something about this system now, because how I felt when I got to Delana's grave was that if we don't do something about this system, what's going to happen is that we are going to have children buried in marked graves in unmarked cemeteries across this country. Because like I said, when we pulled up to that little road, I would not have known that there was a cemetery behind there, and I would not have known that there was the marked grave of Delana Sullivan in the cemetery. And she is one of hundreds of children who are dying in foster care. I don't have the answers. My book is, we need to start asking the right questions here, because this is wrong. This is just,
And I think that's the biggest thing, is opening your mouth and asking the questions. People are so afraid to challenge the system, challenge the status quo. We accept that the government is going to do what they're supposed to do. And we can see time and time again, that's not what happens. It's not until people open their mouths and start, like you said, asking questions. That's the only way you're going to get the answers that are actually going to make a difference.
Yeah. And ask the questions, but then don't accept their usual sugarcoating and lip service. It's like, no, you didn't answer my question, blah, blah, blah. No, you didn't, And so for me, that's what I found just in our small case, was that I had to force the issue every single step of the way. I had to force the issue, and it's like, no, that's not acceptable. No, I want this answered. No. And just keep, trust me, by the end of our ordeal, those social workers were so glad to see the back of me, and the feeling was mutual. It was mutual.
But it's crazy that you have to even go through all of that to get right done.
Right. I totally agree with you. It was absolutely crazy that we had to fight to get back a child who already belonged to us. And it cost me my life savings and a lot of time. Like we had to cash in every cent I had, and I couldn't work because I had to stay with my family. And, going back to when that social worker was asking me while they were taking the baby, what I did for a living, it doesn't matter what my job is. You don't know what's in my heart. Okay. You don't know that I'm going to stay with my daughter every step of the way. Sure, she made mistakes. We all make mistakes. Parents make mistakes. Okay. But that's how children learn coping skills, is watching their parents do the best that they can, and that's all we can do for our children, is just do the best that we can.
That's it. You can't do any more than that.
Yeah, you can't.
So I have the link. I've been showing it throughout this conversation for the Amazon book. I will also, and I will also drop it on Facebook, YouTube, everywhere, so that people can grab this book, get past the first page, because I was like stuck when the conversation was happening. I'm just like, I don't understand. It's like, okay, read the book and then you'll understand. So I've got the link for that. Where else can people find you?
My web. Do you have the link for my website? If they want to contact me, you mean? Yeah, that's it. GentleGiantsAcademia.ed. So that people can just message me in there. Obviously, I don't want to give out my phone number or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely.
If you have questions about the book, or you need to talk, then by all means. But head over to Amazon, and the digital copy of the book is obviously cheaper than the paperback. And actually, I don't even have the paperback yet. I think it's just I've ordered a copy to be sent to Mom, so hopefully she gets it in the next day or week or so. And thanks so much for having me, Nisha.
Thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your story. I'm so glad that your family had a happy ending. And I pray that more stories turn out the way that your story turned out.
Me too. And I really hope that my book helps accomplish that, and that people, gives them hope, and fight for your kids, because if you're not going to do it, no one else is.
No, definitely not.
And all of us as tax-paying citizens, we have the right to start asking questions. Okay, this is our money being spent. funding
Right.
this system. So
To
we
go
have a,
against you.
yes, we have a right to know how our money's being spent. And if it's being spent in the substandard way that I saw these social workers, the 4 that we were dealing with, behaving, then I'm calling BS on it. I don't want my money being spent on this. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you again so much for joining me. Thank you, everybody who is watching this on the replay. I appreciate you, and you guys have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from Permission to Leap, go to permissiontoleap.com and subscribe to our email list. When you do, we'll send you a digital leap guide. Thanks again, and talk to you next time.